Welcome to Mythical Phylogeny Adventurers. I'm your guide Jason, and for many people, one of the greatest difficulties is speaking. But what happens in a fantasy world? It gets to be a mess. When it comes to most fantasy series, they don't really dig into the issues of languages. Often, they'll just resort to using a common tongue, which is spoken by everyone, and this helps avoid the nightmare that I'm about to jump into. First off, do we have anyone here that speaks a few languages? I'm pretty sure we have a couple that speak Spanish. As for me, I know some French and German. Mind you, I've been told my accent is an atrocity with them. Yet I also know a fair bit of American Sign Language. In addition, due to my grandmother being Native American, the tribe elders tried and failed to teach me their old language. Sadly, since no one outside of my tribe uses it, and even half of them still just use English, I only remember a few words for things like turning around and making things plural. And I do like their way. It is so much easier than remembering to add I's, E's, and S's, and then mice versus mouses stuff. Nope, just repeat the word. So mice is just mouse, mouse. Much easier, wouldn't you agree? Let me ask you, what is a language? It is a way to communicate, but what does it need? Well, language has a few necessary traits. The ability to communicate information, in particular, cover information which is intangible, such as honor. In addition, talk about absent things, such as a person or things which haven't happened yet, such as the future. In addition, you need to be able to portray complex tasks, including sequencing. Now, from all of those, there are parts of languages which don't translate. For example, if you watch a movie with people speaking German, they will say auf. What does auf mean? Well, nothing. Or to be more accurate, it is a prefix verb, attached to other words, to add in something along the lines of up, on, and open. In addition, in sign language, there are things called classifiers, used to offer visual descriptions of things. When they say car crash, they will actually gesture out how the crash occurred, or describe exactly what a vase looks like. Yeah, sign language is actually a top-tier language when it comes to describing things. So, what is the point of all my ramblings right here? Well, let's say you're an adventurer, and you are traveling to a foreign land and meeting new races. But what happens when you meet a race which doesn't use the common tongue? Or to be more accurate, your common tongue. I'm betting each region will have a common language, but at what point does the language switch from a second language to a primary language? What happens when it becomes a complete foreign tongue? How would you talk to a person? Well, I got two options. The first option is to use something I used in a science fiction series I wrote. I'll give you the short version. The crew ends up in deep, uncharted space, and they are the first to meet a friendly alien race. Their first conversation was just pointing and grunting basically, until the main character started scribbling out atoms, which served as the foundation of a language. Yet, that only made it easier to explain things on the material aspect. When the crew had to explain to the aliens that they needed to wait, it resulted in a lot more gesturing and using examples. A similar idea was used in Stargate, with the Council of the Four Great Races, but nothing much was done with it. And then most other sci-fi series just go with translation chips or something. But what about in the fantasy world? Well, there's a cop-out right away. A common spell is to use Speak with Animals, which lets you talk with animals, and thus cheat through the language barrier. So, would this work in a fantasy world? Well, maybe. Sometimes even animals get languages and accents, which can make them hard to understand. But this isn't an animal exactly, it is a sentient creature you are trying to speak with. And using Speak with Animals to speak a foreign language is sort of cheap, isn't it? So, are we going to be forced into grunting and pointing to converse? No, there are workarounds, but in a fantasy world, I don't know if they would know what atoms and molecules are. But there might be another foundational aspect which the world is united. And that would be magic. Yes, that is something which could be used to guide a conversation. And sadly, since I don't understand magical principles myself, I can't describe exactly what those fundamentals would be. But what if we don't have magic? Are we back to pointing and grunting? Sadly, yes, sort of. So what are you going to do? Now on Earth, when two cultures meet, which didn't share language, it took time and many meetings to start true dialogue. Their first meetings are little better than me, Jason, you, and hopefully you respond as me, you, and don't say me, Jason, and confuse that as hello. I mean, you've probably heard the rumor that kangaroo means I don't understand you in the Aboriginal language. Now, I can't prove this rumor, but it's still funny. And this is where sign language comes in. Now, every language has their own sign language, and many different nations have different sign languages, even if they use the same spoken language. But for the most part, there are universal signs. Most basic human needs, like eating, involves pointing to the mouth, or drinking with bringing something to your mouth. And this is going to leave us with some real riveting conversations, isn't it? Sure, this could work as a method to learn the names of different kinds of foods and drinks, and from there, you could teach the names of utensils and plates. But this could actually work to address non-physical concepts of dining etiquette. This will require more gestures, but it will work. Well, sign language isn't just your hands, it involves facial expressions, in addition to gestures. And this will let us add some context to words. Smiles are universal among humans, it means good. But is that going to do us any good when we are dealing with something which doesn't have a human face, like say a lizard man? Well, facial expressions are going to be a mess. Would you even be able to tell if they are smiling? I don't know. Worse if we have a skeleton with no facial muscles you're talking to. So, facial expressions might be an issue. And that means you'll likely be forced to rely on more gestures. But how do you gesture time? Well, how does sign language do time? American Sign Language uses a wristwatch symbol. Well, that's the best way to explain it. They use what amounts to a little circle on the wrist, and movement speed and length for minutes and seconds. But would a fancy world have watches? Maybe? But an easier one is day, using the movement of your arm to represent the sun going from morning to night. Of course, this symbol would fail if you're in a world where the sun's movements isn't the same as ours, such as one with multiple suns, or constant one. But I am sure that they have some sort of reliable constant which they base time off of. Of course, there are some fun issues which come up with a fantasy world. And this is why I asked about the word Alf. There are concepts which are not going to match up. And one of those is going to come with winged races. Tell me, would a race of harpies use different words for flying and walking? What about an amphibian race with swimming in water and walking on land? We use different words since we can't fly and swimming isn't our natural element. So to them, what is the difference between these two methods of movement? There's a good chance that they wouldn't have a distinction. And all of this is assuming you can even speak each other's words. If you don't have lips, there are going to be sounds which are hard to make. Just look up some of the dialogue that ventriloquists use. They will avoid certain words due to requiring lip movements. Avian and reptilian races might struggle with some human and elven words, but I bet they have sounds which you'll struggle with. It means you might have some sort of accent to deal with. But we can take this a bit further. And a great example of this comes from the anime and manga Mushoku Tensei. In this series, there is a race called Meguridians, who are naturally telepathic and don't use verbal language. Alternatively, in the Mass Effect series, there is a race called the Hanar, who communicate by using bioluminescence. And this is an issue. What happens when you are having to talk with a species which uses a method which you can't do? Sure, the Hanar situation could be solved using a color spray spell, but how the bloody hell are you going to figure that out? Seriously, what is it going to take to even figure out that this jellyfish creature is intelligent enough to communicate with? I mean, what are you, just going to assume that everything you meet is going to be intelligent and taking time to try and communicate? Futurama actually made a joke about this some 20 plus years ago. We see Fry pulling splinters from his hand after he failed to open dialogue with the cactus people of a plant. And it was just a cactus, not a cactus people. And to be honest, I don't have a bloody clue as to a full-on test to reliably prove something is intelligent. Hopefully, you have trade knowledge to give you a heads up when you arrive in an area. Else, you'll likely end up like the red-headed delivery boy from Futurama. Inevitably, someone is going to do something to trigger hostilities with a race which you don't immediately recognize. And then you'll likely land a war, or hopefully, you'll find a way to come to an understanding and to forgive each other. Such as Mass Effect's Human-Turian War. I really need to do a discussion on that series. It's really well done on the biology and the species interactions. Honestly, a telepathy spell might be a critical one if you're going to interact with another race. It's just a simple way to allow for a quick conversation and reduce the risk of hostilities. Of course, what happens when telepathy doesn't translate language? Generally, people are said to think in two different ways. Tell me which you are. Do you think in words mostly, or do you think in images predominantly? For me, most of my thoughts are images. My mind is like having a movie playing. And sadly, that does make it hard to put thoughts into words. I do wonder if a telepath listening to my thoughts would feel like watching a movie rather than getting a lecture. That might be easier to understand if you can't translate the language with telepathy. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of hurdles with communications in a fantasy world. And that is assuming that you can even figure out who and what you are talking with. I'm sure I have missed a few other issues which will occur here. Let me know down below. Thank you for watching, adventurers. Please return next time. Until then, I'll see you on the roads.